In this presentation, I'm going to give you a quick overview of Maya's render layers and render passes. We're going to use the layers and passes to segment our scene into multiple images, and then recombine those images back together inside of Maya Composite. And this is the end result that we'll basically get to. It's a set extension shot that was originally shot on a Micro Four Thirds camera that I then added some CG elements, things like the background city as well as the spaceships. In post, we added glow, blur, depth of field, as well as some basic grading and some film grain to get to this end result. So let's jump into Maya and talk about render layers and render passes. They both allow you to segment your scene into multiple images, but they get there using slightly different manners. Maya's render layers allow you to segment the scene at object levels. So this means that you have a lot of flexibility at the cost of speed. Maya's render passes, on the other hand, segment the scene at the shader level. This allows you to extract the information during the rendering process almost for free, and you can get things like all the different lighting components, as well as do some basic geometry isolation using pass contribution maps. Whenever I'm working, I always use a combination of both render layers and render passes to get to the end results that I need. So for this example, what we're going to do is we're going to use Maya's render layers to first isolate out just the background pass and get the shadows cast onto it from our speeder and our background ship, our spaceship. So what we'll do is we'll create a new render layer. So what happens is you have a master layer, and that's your default state of your scene, or your default version of your scene. When you create new layers, you associate geometry with those and lights with those. So I'll add in to my background layer my sun sky light, as well as my ship. I'll add in the image plane for the cameras, the ground, the city, and the speeder. So we'll add all the skies into that layer. We'll give this layer something, a meaningful name like background. And once you have your objects associated with your render layer, you can start to make changes from the master layer. It could be something as simple as a shader assignment that deviates from that master layer. So if we assign a new Lambert material, that is going to be unique, that shader assignment, to that layer because that's the layer I had highlighted when I added that shader. So if we jump back to our master layer, obviously we'll get back to our default state. If we jump onto the background layer, you can see that that shader assignment changes on that given layer. Any attribute inside of Maya can have a render layer override associated with it, or a deviation from that master layer, by simply right mouse clicking on top of the attribute and creating the layer override. When you do this, you get a visual representation that there's a change made to that layer. So if we put this to a value of 2, and again we jump back to our master layer, you can see that the intensity is a value of 1 on our master layer, or the default state that it was at. If we jump to our background layer, you can see that deviation, or that change that we made, basically unique to that layer. So for this example, really what we want to do is we want to change the primary visibility on our ship and our speeder so that they're not visible, but they are casting shadows and onto our ground plane. So we'll just bring up the attributes and we'll turn off primary visibility for the background ship. We'll go ahead and we'll select our speeder, and there's a bunch of nodes inside of this. So what I want to do is I'm just going to use select. We'll grab all of those nodes and we'll bring up the attribute spreadsheet to change all of those at one time. So we'll bring up the attribute spreadsheet, make sure we're on our render tab, scroll over to primary visibility, and again I'm on layer 2 when I'm changing this, so that change is unique to layer 2. Obviously if we jump back to master layer, primary visibility is on, jump to layer 2, primary visibility is off. So we have this new layer set up that's going to be unique to give me just the background with the shadows. So if we go ahead and we render this out, you can see that this will render out pretty quickly. I'm rendering using the sun sky system. I'm using a linear color workflow, and we have a gamma set of 2.2 on my render view to get it kind of back into that sRGB color space. So pretty straightforward. You can see that ground plane getting those shadows cast on there. So that's our background layer. So the next thing we want to do is create a new layer that's going to allow us to have just the ships and the speeder on it. So we'll go ahead and we'll create a new layer, and we'll call this one ship. And we'll start associating some geometry and some lights onto that layer. So we'll grab our background ship, we'll grab our sun sky, we'll grab our camera, and actually we don't need the camera. We'll grab our ground, and we'll grab our speeder, and we'll add all of that to this scene. So for this guy, I want to turn the primary visibility off on the ground plane. I just want it to show up in the reflections and have it bounce final gather rays up on the bottom of our ship. So we'll turn the primary visibility off, and we're going to be using Maya's pass system to extract lots of different passes. I really want to get granular with this. I want to have all the different lighting components for that background ship broken out for me so that I have ultimate flexibility inside of post. I also want to have a couple different a couple passes made for the beauty of the speeder and a matte pass made just for the dude. So we're going to use the pass contribution maps to isolate those geometry into individual passes. So we'll create a couple pass contribution maps. We'll call this one big because it's the big ship in the background. We'll create another pass contribution map. We'll call this one dude, and we'll create a third pass contribution map that we'll call speeder. Oops, spelled that wrong. So what we need to do is we need to associate geometry with these pass contribution maps. So that's pretty straightforward. We'll just add that guy to that. We'll grab the speeder and we'll add that to that pass contribution map, and we'll grab our dude and we'll add that to the pass contribution map. So now that we've got our pass contribution maps set up, we need to go ahead and start to generate some passes to associate with these newly defined contribution maps, and that's done in the render settings window. So if you go to the pass tab, this is pretty cool stuff here. Basically what we're going to do is we're going to bring up the create window, and you can see that we have a large list of different passes that we can create here. So like I said, that background ship, we really want to get granular with it and add lots of different passes that will allow me to really isolate all the different lighting components that go into making up the beauty pass. So we're going to create a beauty. We'll create an ambient pass, a beauty pass, a diffuse material color, so that's just straight diffuse color. We're going to create direct irradiance and direct irradiance without shadow, so this will give me the ability to isolate the shadows out and combine that with the diffuse material color to get to basically what would be a diffuse channel. But I don't want to make a diffuse channel. I want to build it up at the most basic level. We'll grab a glow source. Actually, we can leave that one off. We don't really need to isolate that out for this. We'll grab the indirect illumination, so that's going to be the final gather bounce light. We'll grab reflection. We'll grab shadow. So we've got shadow, reflection. Oh, we don't need shadow. We're going to make the shadow pass ourselves out of the direct irradiance and the direct irradiance no shadow. We need to grab the specularity. So I've got some passes here that should get me everything that I want to play around with and draw your attention to. Oh, an ambient. I know that there's some ambient. Okay, I got that. So we'll create all that. So that's going to be all the passes that go into making up my ship. We're going to create another beauty that's going to be ship no hold, because there's a pretty cool feature that we want to play around with, and I'll explain this a bit more in a second. So we'll create that one, and we're going to make a beauty for the speeder. And we're going to create a matte for the dude. So let's get our matte pass for the dude. All right. So what we have here is we've got all the different passes in my scene that I could associate to a given render layer. So we're going to, for this, we're going to associate all of these passes to the ship layer. So we'll link those guys together. So notice if I jump back to background layer, none of those passes are associated with the background layer. They are associated with the ship layer. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go down to these pass contribution maps, and we're going to say, all right, for the geometry that's on that pass contribution map for dude, what passes do I want to have? The only pass that I want to have made for that is the matte pass. So this is going to allow me to isolate out that dude and color correct him individually, because I'll have a matte generated just for the geometry associated with that pass contribution map. Same thing for the speeder. We want to have just a beauty pass made for all the geometry that was added on to that pass contribution map for speeder. And then the last one that we're going to do is going to be big, which is going to be the ship, which is going to have a lot of different individual passes broken out. That'll again will give me a lot of flexibility that we're going to combine back together to get to that beauty pass. Now, notice that I made another beauty pass called ship no hold. Basically, when we create passes inside of Maya, we have the ability to tell it whether or not we want to have the pixels that would be behind something be generated or not, and that's called the holdout. So for this ship no hold beauty, we're going to turn off that holdout just so that you can see the difference between the beauty with that and the beauty without that attribute turned on. Because often you're going to want to have those pixels behind. If you're trying to do motion blur or something like that, you need to have pixels back there, not just a black hole, so that when the motion blur streaks, there's something behind that object. So with that all set up, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to render this out. And it's going to go through and basically during the render time extract all those different passes for us. And you can see that the speed's going to be very, very fast here. It's still going to render pretty quickly, about 30 seconds to render out this 720p frame. So this is the primary buffer, and from this primary buffer, all the secondary buffers, all those passes are basically being extracted and written to disk at the same time. So when that render is done, you can view those passes either by doing load pass or by going to the temp directory. So in your images directory, let's just kind of scroll over here. In your images directory, there's always a temp folder, and in that temp folder is going to be whatever renders you've just done. So we've got that background plate, and then we've got the ship render layer. So if you double click on this guy, it brings up IMF display. Now remember I said we were working in a linear color space here, so when IMF display pops on, it's going to have a gamma set to 1, and we want to get that to an sRGB gamma of 2.2. So that's our primary buffer, and here you can see there's our matte for our dude. Here's the ambient for the ship. Here's the beauty that we want to get to. So if we go to ship beauty, you can see it's got that black holdout in there. This was the one that we turned the no holdout off. So if we wanted to have something images in the background there kind of streaking through, we have the ability to do that with a no holdout. And simple things like reflection. So all these different passes we can use to basically build back up our object back to a beauty pass inside of a compositing application. So the easiest way to get all these passes loaded up into Maya Composite is by using a precomp. Basically what a precomp does is it basically allows you to go through and find all the images on disk and have it generate a comp for you that's got those automatically loaded. So we'll go to our Precomp Export. So we're going to export out for this camera our background layer and our ship. These are all the passes that we're going to bring out, and we'll just call this DTO new. Let's put an underscore in there. So we'll export all that out. It's going to bring up our file browser, so we're going to call it, I don't know, we'll call it fun to DTO, something that should pop right out at me. So we'll save that precomp out, and we'll jump over to Maya Composite really quickly, and we'll do an import. So let's go ahead and just import in that precomp. And I think I need to refresh that directory. So we'll jump out of that directory and then back into that directory, and that should have refreshed it. So there's my precomp that we just saved out. So we're going to import that in. We'll just say OK on this guy. Now remember I said that those images were in the temp directory. So it by default looks to your render settings, and the render settings would think you're doing a batch render, so the images would be in the images directory. But since we are doing preview renders, it's going to be in the temp directory. So just add temp if you're doing a preview render and you want to load it up inside of Maya Composite. So we'll add that temp, hit OK. It's going to go through, find all of these different passes, and really just bring them into Maya Composite for us. So we can close that down now, jump over here. So here comes in all of our images. So we've got our background, our master beauty for our background. We've got all of our different ship images. And what we want to do is we want to build these guys up. So we're trying to get to this ship beauty. And we're going to be doing that by taking our director radiance and our director radiance no shadow, and this is going to allow us to isolate out and get our raw shadow. So by taking your director radiance and your director radiance no shadow and subtracting those from each other using a simple blend comp node, that'll give me my raw shadow. So we'll take our director radiance and our director radiance no shadow, and we'll switch this to a subtract. And by doing that, what we get is the raw shadow. So if you take the raw shadow and you create another blend comp and you subtract the raw shadow from the director radiance, that gives me the ability now to dial in that shadow. So if we subtract that back out using subtract, you can now see that this and this look the same because they are the same, but this gives me the flexibility of, oops, let's put that back to a 1 here. We got to drop the luminosity. That gives me the flexibility of dialing in that shadow now. So this could have been a pass that I rendered out. I just wanted to show you how you can build it up yourself. So I'm trying to break it down into the lowest level of components possible. Now it's also worth mentioning that all of these images that we've got inside of here were rendered out in EXR. So this viewer right now has a gamma of 1. So we want to get that viewer to have a gamma of 2.2. So to do that, if you look at your player options, you have this thing called display pass-through that allows you to put a color corrector on the actual viewer. So if we just drag and drop that down here and switch this to EXR display, you can see that it kind of gets it back into that color space. So there's our direct irradiance, no shadow. Our raw shadow subtracted from that gives us our direct irradiance. If you take your direct irradiance and you multiply that times your straight diffuse color, so this has no shading, this is just diffuse material, if you multiply that times direct irradiance, that'll give you what would essentially be a diffuse pass. So again, we're going to grab this blend comp, we'll create another blend comp. The blend comp really is your workhorse for doing basic math operations. We'll switch this to multiply. We'll put this guy on top, that guy on the bottom. That gives me my diffuse channel. So then all we have to do is start adding in all the different lighting components. So we've got the diffuse channel. Let's grab our ambient. Let's grab our, what is that? That's a beauty pass there. That's basically what we're going to be building up to. Or this is a beauty pass without the holdout. That's what we're going to be building up to also. Let's grab our reflection. We want to get over there, our indirect, as well as our specularity. So I'm just kind of dragging some nodes out here. And these are going to be just simple add operations. So we're going to create another blend comp. We'll switch this one to be an add. So we want to, let's break that. I didn't want to link that in there. Let's just take that guy. We're adding in our indirect illumination, right? If you hold down the C key and you drag a node out, it copies the node with the attributes that you had set for that node. So now we're going to add in our reflection. So you can see we get a little bit of pop of reflection there. Hold down that C key and drag that out. Again, we'll add in our specularity. So we're now starting to get really close to that beauty pass, right? And I think I had an ambient. There it is, a little bit of ambient. So again, we'll hold down the C key. We'll drag that guy out so we get that ambient kind of added in there. So now we can take this guy right here, pretty straightforward. We'll create a new blend comp. We'll put our speeder ship on top of that guy, right? We can grab our background plate, hold down our C key one more time. We'll put that background back here, and we just need to grab a matte file. So I can grab, did I not do that? Let's grab this Master of Beauty and we'll just use its matte file. So there you go. We've kind of built it back up and gotten to where it is. Now the thing that's kind of cool about this is I can set a context point by just clicking down my 1 key and holding on that, or I can set a context point here and then clicking in there, and you can see that I now have this ultimate flexibility. So if I wanted, more indirect illumination, I could add it in, or less indirect illumination, I could take it out. If I wanted those shadows, if I overdrive that indirect illumination and get more bounce light in there, you can see those shadows kind of got washed out. So if we go back here to my shadows and I overdrive the shadows, you can see I can start to introduce those shadows, sort of back in. So the idea behind this is you can really kind of get exactly what you want. You have lots of flexibility. And the thing that's great about it is, it's so much faster to make these changes in post. Oops, let's undo that. That was a little funky. To make these changes in post than it is to obviously re-render the stuff out. So I'll just walk you through the final comp that I used to get to that end result that we talked about. So you can see this has a good bit more work done to it. Let's go ahead and let's go to our output for this guy, and we'll turn off that display modifier there, and we'll just start kind of walking through this guy. We'll get out to maybe like a frame 100. So this is really the final comp, and basically what I did with this guy is I've got the speeder ship sort of broken out. It gets built up into if we look at our tool output here, it gets kind of built up into this ship. It gets some reflections added into it. It gets some blurred onto it, some motion blurred onto it. Then I've got my background ship. It gets some basic color correction done. It gets this guy sort of layered on top of it. More color correction. Another kind of remap color correction that happens there. We've got our background city. It's got some color correction done to it. Then we've got our original, or our kind of background plate. We've got our original plate. We combine those two guys together. Then from this plate, what I did is I pulled a key, right? So I just, if you kind of zoom in here, you can see that I pulled this key for the sky. I color corrected a little bit, and then I put the background images of the city behind that using that really great keyer that Maya Composite has. It's the master keyer. It's an awesome keyer. Then we blend the background back into it with another color correct on that. So we're kind of putting those guys on top of each other. And then I did something kind of cool here. I wanted to get some Z depth happening, so it was easy for me to get Z information for the ship and the background planes and things like that. But I also needed to get some Z information for the tree. So what I did is I pulled a key of the tree, and then I kind of blurred the edges there, and I comped that on top. So I'm using that tree, and I just set the gray value for that tree to kind of put it into the right space, so that when we use this lens blur that's using the modulate image to kind of give some Z-depth information into that, add a little bit of glow to it, add a little bit of grain to it, and then the end result is basically that background plate. So that's really what I did, using this kind of video footage, using some keying operations, did some kind of fun stuff with some Z-depth, and the ultimate result looks pretty cool, I think. So that's really how you can use Maya's render layers and Maya's render passes to segment your scene. Some of them work at the object level, some of them work at the shading level, ultimately to get these images that we can use in post to end up with these end results. So I hope that makes good sense to you guys. I'm including a link at the end of this video that goes to a white paper that goes into great detail about Maya's render layers and render passes. Go ahead and check it out. It's really an awesome resource that's on the Autodesk website. So I hope you guys enjoyed this, and check out my blog. It's on the area. It's called The Desk. I have lots of little tips and tricks for rendering on that guy too. So again, thank you for your time.